Out on America's roads, every bus driver has a story. Some buses felt solid and honest, the kind you could trust on a cold morning. But others, well, they were the ones that made you grip the wheel a little tighter and pray the route ended early. These were the machines with blind spots big enough to hide a pickup, brakes that seemed to choose their own schedule, and rattles that shook clear through your spine. Ask any veteran driver and they'll nod. They remember the long shifts, the rough rides, the buses that never should have left the yard. So today, we're counting down the ones that earned their reputation the hard way. The buses American drivers absolutely hated to run. Grumman 870, 1978 to 1980. If there's one bus that American drivers still shake their heads at, it's the Grumman 870. On paper, it sounded like the future. Lightweight aluminum construction, modern styling, a break from the heavy old iron of the 1960s. But once these buses hit real American streets, the dream fell apart fast, sometimes literally. The aluminum frame didn't just flex, it cracked. Drivers remember hearing pops and groans from the joints, only to find fresh fractures after a long shift. Some units even split during normal service, turning routine routes into rolling safety drills. And the ride? Rough doesn't begin to cover it. The 870 bounced and jolted on uneven pavement, tossing the wheel in the driver's hands and tossing passengers out of their seats. The steering felt loose, vague, and unpredictable, especially above 40 or 45 miles per hour. Keeping it in a straight lane on the freeway was a full-time job. Worse, no matter how many times these buses went into the garage, the same problems came right back. Mechanics fought them. Drivers avoided them. Some refused to shift outright if the yard lineup was all 870s. Most of all, the bus just felt unsafe. And that's something a driver never forgets. GM RTS Early Series, 1977 to 1981. Following the mess left by the Grumman 870, you might expect the next generation of transit design to bring relief. But for many American drivers, the early RTS series only traded one kind of misery for another. Its futuristic, rounded body looked sharp in brochures, but behind the wheel, it created one of the worst visibility problems of its era. The two-piece windshield and thick A-pillars carved out a massive blind spot on the left side, big enough to hide a cyclist, a pedestrian, or even a compact car. Veteran drivers still talk about that sinking feeling when turning into a busy intersection, praying nothing lurked behind the pillar. Steering didn't inspire confidence either. Feedback was soft and vague, making it hard to feel what the front wheels were actually doing. And inside, ergonomics were a puzzle. The dashboard was scattered, switches were placed at odd angles, and nothing seemed exactly where your hands expected it to be. Then came the electrical quirks. Doors that opened when they shouldn't, doors that refused to open at all, warning lights that flickered like Christmas decorations, and an HVAC system that barely cooled the cabin. On a July afternoon, the RTS felt like a rolling oven. It didn't take long before drivers had a nickname for it, one that stuck for decades: the spaceship from hell. NABI 416-436 Gen 1, 1990s. If the early RTS felt like a confusing spaceship, the first generation NABI 416 and 436 often felt like they were held together with hope and plastic clips. Drivers across the country remember the same nightmare: electrical gremlins that never quit. Wiring harnesses failed early and often, sending false warnings through the dash until the whole panel lit up like a disco floor. One moment you'd get a door alarm, the next an engine light, and none of it meant anything you could actually trust. Inside, the bus didn't feel any better. Interior panels rattled so loudly at idle that some drivers joked they could play along with the vibration. Out on the road, especially between 35 and 45 miles per hour, the entire body shuddered as if every bolt wanted to quit at once. And the air suspension? Completely unpredictable. One side would sit high, the other would sag, giving the whole bus a lopsided stance that made riders stare and drivers cringe. Steering wasn't much comfort either, too numb, too loose, and never quite consistent from one coach to the next. Many depots gave these buses a nickname that summed it all up in 3 painful words: cheap plastic box. For countless drivers, that label wasn't a joke. It was their daily reality. Novabus LFS Gen 1, 1996 to 1998. When the first-generation Novabus LFS rolled into American and Canadian fleets, drivers hoped the new low-floor era would make their work easier. Instead, the early LFS became one of those buses everyone was relieved to see retired. The biggest problem sat right behind them: a poorly designed engine bay that simply couldn't breathe. Cooling was inadequate from day one, and these buses overheated with frustrating regularity. Many drivers can still recall the sinking feeling of watching the temperature needle creep up, knowing the bus might stall before they even reached the terminal. Braking didn't inspire confidence either. Sometimes the pedal felt strong, other times it felt soft and distant, as if the brakes were making their own decisions. And visibility? For a bus advertised as modern, the low-floor body hadn't been refined yet, leaving awkward blind spots that made tight downtown corners feel like a gamble. The interior ergonomics didn't help. The steering felt heavy and sluggish, especially when navigating quick turns, and the pedal layout forced drivers into an unnatural leg angle that left knees aching after a long shift. Add early-generation electrical quirks, lights flickering, random faults, unresponsive switches, and frustration grew fast. It's no surprise that some Montreal drivers famously called it a prototype disguised as production. For many behind the wheel, that was the truth. MCI G4500, 2001 to 2004. Among American coach drivers, especially those who wore the Greyhound uniform, the G4500 holds a reputation nothing short of infamous. From the first day it entered service, drivers complained about the one thing they must rely on more than anything else: visibility. The A-pillar was thick, the driver's seat sat unusually low, and the forward angle of the windshield created a blind zone that felt downright dangerous, especially when pulling out of stations or merging onto busy highways. And once you got rolling, the problems didn't stop. These coaches were notorious for leaking: water, oil, coolant, air, you name it. Some drivers joked that if a G4500 wasn't dripping, that was the real warning sign. Out on the interstate, they vibrated harshly and roared loud enough to drown out conversation. Keeping the bus steady in crosswinds was a battle, thanks to vague steering and a front end that never felt planted. Breakdowns were common, and when a G4500 quit, it often quit in the worst places: long stretches of desert or remote highway where help was hours away. The poorly designed air intake also caused the engine to struggle on climbs, leaving drivers nursing the throttle while passengers grew impatient. And every complaint from the back, every rattle, every delay, every temperature issue seemed to fall on the driver. Many felt blamed for problems they couldn't control. That's why, to this day, countless Greyhound veterans agree. The G4500 wasn't just disliked, it was the most hated coach in the company's history. Orion 6 Hybrid, late 1990s to 2000s. For many American drivers, the Orion 6 Hybrid was the textbook example of a good idea that arrived far too early. The technology simply wasn't ready, and every shift behind the wheel felt like a gamble. Power delivery changed from moment to moment, strong one second, sluggish the next, leaving drivers unsure how the bus would respond when pulling into traffic or climbing a grade. Worse, these hybrids had a bad habit of quitting right in the middle of intersections, the kind of failure that turns a normal route into a safety nightmare. Heat was a constant issue too. The battery bay wasn't insulated well, and on summer days it radiated straight into the cabin, making long shifts miserable. Braking added another layer of stress. The regenerative system never felt consistent, grabbing sharply at low speeds and sending riders lurching forward. Steering wasn't much comfort either, with a noticeable lag that made the bus feel half a beat behind the driver's hands. Then came the endless stream of small but painful failures. Contactors, inverters, wiring harnesses, all waiting to go wrong without warning. Some depots kept shelves full of spare electronics just to keep these buses alive. It's no wonder so many drivers joked, only half seriously, "I'd rather push a bus than drive this thing." Flexible Metro, late gen. By the time the late generation Flexible Metro rolled into service, many drivers already knew what they were in for. A bus that aged faster than it should and made every shift feel a little longer than the one before. Rust showed up early, around door frames, under the stepwells, and along the lower frame rails, giving the whole coach a tired, worn look, even when it was still fairly new. Out on the freeway, the steering felt loose and sloppy, forcing drivers to fight the wheel to keep the bus centered whenever traffic picked up speed. Braking added its own kind of tension. Some days the pedal felt normal, other days it felt soft and distant, as if the bus needed an extra second to decide whether it wanted to slow down. That unpredictability made every downhill and every crowded stop a small moment of anxiety. Heat was another constant complaint. On summer afternoons, the Metro's cabin could feel like a furnace, with weak airflow and little relief for the driver. The transmission didn't help either. Late gens were known for harsh, jerky shifts that sent passengers lurching forward and left drivers apologizing at every light. And between 40 and 50 miles per hour, the whole interior rattled and shook, panels buzzing like they were ready to fall off. For many drivers, the late-gen Metro wasn't just worn out, it felt worn out from day one. Gillig Phantom, L10, M11. The Gillig Phantom has a loyal following among mechanics and fleet managers, but for many drivers, especially those running busy city routes, it was a workhorse that didn't always feel like a partner. The steering was heavy, far heavier than most transit coaches of its era, and that weight turned stop-and-go urban service into an all-day workout. Add the Cummins L10 or M11 under the floor, and things got even tougher. Both engines were strong and dependable, but at low RPM they shook the entire front end, sending a steady vibration through the wheel and right up a driver's arms. Inside the cabin, noise was a constant companion. The Phantom wasn't insulated the way modern buses are, so every roar, whine, and rattle made its way to the driver's seat. Long shifts left drivers with ringing ears and pounding headaches. Visibility wasn't ideal either. The seat sat just a bit too high for some drivers, forcing an awkward posture and making it harder to judge the nose of the bus in tight spots. The sharp, squared-off body didn't help on narrow downtown streets. Clipping mirrors or misjudging a tight turn felt like a daily concern. It's no surprise that more than a few veteran operators summed it up with a nickname that stuck: the old-school pain machine. Thomas Saf-T-Liner ER Early, 1980s to 1990s. For many school bus drivers across the 80s and 90s, the early Thomas Saf-T-Liner ER was the kind of bus that made a long afternoon route feel even longer. Rear-engine school buses were supposed to offer better comfort and quieter rides, but this early ER often delivered the opposite. The visibility behind the bus was one of its biggest flaws. The rear window sat high, the mirrors didn't cover enough area, and backing into tight school lots felt like doing it half-blind. Many drivers dreaded reverse maneuvers, especially during busy dismissal hours. Heat was another constant frustration. The engine and cooling system sat right behind the driver compartment, and with weak HVAC, the cabin warmed up fast, sometimes even in cooler weather. The pedal layout didn't help either. The angles were awkward, and drivers often complained about sore ankles and stiff knees after a full shift. Steering feel was dry and disconnected, making low-speed turns unpredictable and high-speed corrections tense. And when the bus entered a curve at speed, the front end had a habit of pushing wide, classic understeer, forcing drivers to manhandle the wheel just to keep the bus on line. For many operators, the early ER wasn't unsafe, But it was undeniably uncomfortable, and that alone made it one of the buses they hated most. Bluebird TC2000 RE. The rear-engine TC2000 RE was meant to be Bluebird's affordable workhorse, but for countless drivers, it quickly became a bus they hoped to avoid. The biggest problem sat right behind them. The engine compartment was packed so tight that heat built up fast. A hot engine is a stressed engine, and these buses were known for stalling, losing power, or coughing their way through a shift, especially on warm afternoons. Mechanics disliked working on them, and drivers dreaded being assigned one because a breakdown always felt one hill or one red light away. The weight bias didn't help either. With so much mass hanging over the rear, the TC2000 RE felt sluggish in tight turns and slow to respond when weaving through school lots or narrow suburban streets. Steering was heavy and coarse, never giving the driver that reassuring sense of control you want in a full-size school bus. At idle, the whole cabin buzzed. The vibration worked its way through the seat frame and up the steering column, leaving many drivers exhausted before their route was half done. Gear changes weren't smooth either. The powertrain often lurched or hesitated, making stop-and-go service a chore. And on hilly routes? Most drivers agreed the TC2000 RE was the last bus they wanted to take up a grade. And that brings us to the end of our list. The buses American drivers truly dreaded. Some of them looked promising on paper. Some were born from good intentions or new ideas. But once they hit real streets, real weather, real traffic, and real routes, their flaws came out fast, and the drivers felt every one of them. If you've ever sat behind the wheel of these machines, you remember the long shifts, the blind spots, the rattles, the heat, and those moments when you just hoped the bus would make it to the end of the line. So now it's your turn. Which one did you hate the most? Which one made you rethink your career choices? Share your stories in the comments, and let's keep these memories alive, one rough ride at a time.